Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of What the Dementia by Bambu Care. I'm your host, Brianna Wilson. I'm a certified dementia practitioner and the founder of Bambu Care. So today's topic is all about the role of genetics in dementia. I know that for a lot of people, when a family member is diagnosed with dementia, they wonder if and worry that they too will get dementia. Now, fortunately, most dementias are not hereditary. As of now, we still understand age to be the biggest risk factor. Not the only risk factor, but the most influential. But we aren't here to talk about age, right? We're here to talk about genetics. So, to understand genetics, we first have to talk about genes. So, we as humans have well over 20,000 different genes. And for each gene we have, there's two copies. One copy that we've inherited from our mom and one from our dad. And our genes are what allow certain characteristics to be expressed and passed down from one generation to the next. So your eye color, your hair color, your height, things like that. And then even certain diseases. So something that can happen to these genes is a mutation, which is basically a change in the gene from its normal form, and a person can inherit a mutated gene for a certain disease. Now, luckily, like I said, the majority of dementia cases are not caused by an inherited genetic mutation. But there are some rare forms of dementia that would fall in this category, and we will discuss this a little bit more in just a bit, okay? However, researchers do believe there to be a link between the risk for developing dementia and what's called susceptibility or risk genes. So, with these genes, a person will not inevitably get dementia, but they are at an increased risk of developing it. They are more susceptible, okay? Now, as to not go too far down the rabbit hole, which is super easy to do with this topic, I'm only going to focus on a few of the dementias, with the strongest emphasis on Alzheimer's disease and then a touch of Lewy body dementia and frontotemporal dementia. And then we will touch on genetic testing and a potential opportunity for free genetic testing through a company called Probably Genetic. So after listening to this podcast episode, if you would like a part 2, all you have to do is email us at podcast@whatthedementia.com and let us know that you're interested, because there's definitely more dementias that we can discuss and a lot deeper that we can get into when it comes to genetics and dementia. So just let us know, okay? But real quick, before we get going, if you enjoy our podcast episodes, please be sure to give us a good rating to help other dementia care partners find our podcast. It would be super helpful. If you would like to keep up with us between episodes, consider following us on Instagram at Let's Bamboo or joining us in our free support community at letsbamboo.com/champions, okay? Also, super big announcement, we have officially launched Bamboo Dozens as a large 12-piece puzzle monthly subscription box. I'm going to leave a link in the podcast notes so that you can learn more about Bamboo Dozens, but I am super excited about it, and if you want to win some entries into our giveaway and a special 10% off discount code to our Bamboo shop, then you'll want to subscribe before February 4th, okay? And first puzzles will be shipping out between March 15th and 17th, so you have until February 28th to claim your box, but February 4th if you want all the special additives, okay? Now, next week we will be having our housekeeping episode. We have a lot of exciting updates, so you will definitely want to tune in again next week, okay? So if you're ready, let's get into this topic, and we'll go ahead and start by talking about late onset Alzheimer's disease, which sounds super fancy and intricate, but it's just Alzheimer's disease diagnosed in persons over 65 years of age. So again, we know age to be the biggest risk factor for developing this type of dementia, followed by lifestyle choices. But researchers have also found there to be evidence of risk genes having some influence. So the most well-known risk gene that also has the largest effect on the potential development of late-onset Alzheimer's disease is called ApoE. And there are different versions of it, like ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. and you may be most familiar with ApoE4 or at least heard of it once or twice before. So what they've found is that people with one copy of ApoE4 are about 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's and at a younger age. And those with 2 copies of ApoE4, meaning that they inherited one from each of their parents, are more than 8 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. But even with that being said, I want to emphasize that not everyone who has a copy or even 2 of the ApoE4 gene allele will develop Alzheimer's. And the thing is, they don't really understand the connection very well, other than with this particular gene allele, they found that a person had a greater buildup of amyloid plaque in the brain or clusters of Lewy bodies. But again, not every person with ApoE4 will develop Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body dementia. And for those who do, it really is unclear why some people with this ApoE4 allele go on to develop Alzheimer's disease, while others go on to develop Lewy body dementia, okay? Now, just as a brief insert, even though Lewy body dementia does share this risk gene with Alzheimer's disease, research has also found that it may have unique genetic risk factors of its own that we unfortunately won't get into for this podcast episode. But again, if you want a part 2, all you have to do is let us know, okay? And even the discussion of ApoE4 can really be a whole podcast episode of its own, okay? But let's keep going. So let's move on to early onset Alzheimer's disease. Now, this is when a person develops Alzheimer's disease before the age of 65. Now, in some cases, a very rare number of early onset Alzheimer's disease cases are in fact caused by inheritance of a mutated or faulty gene. And you'll sometimes hear this referred to as familial or early onset inherited Alzheimer's disease. Now, with this, the gene is passed down directly by an affected parent, and what they've found is that these particular faulty genes are involved in the abnormal buildup of amyloid. So people who carry one of these faulty genes will develop Alzheimer's, and then their children will have a 50% chance of developing dementia because all it takes is one. But again, this is pretty rare, though it is a thing. Then lastly, we have frontotemporal dementia, and this is a rare form of dementia comparatively, but still pretty prevalent and is most commonly diagnosed between the ages of 45 and 65. So it's often an early onset type of dementia. It's also one of the most likely to be caused by a single gene change. In other words, caused by a mutated or faulty gene. And what they are finding is that oftentimes when dementia is caused by a single gene change, it often develops earlier in life in that early onset dementia group, okay? And what we typically see is that it will run strong in the family. So for example, your grandpa, your dad, and your brother will all have had a history of frontotemporal dementia. That's where that familial part will come in, and so it will be referred to as familial frontotemporal dementia, and we believe this accounts for about 30% or so of FTD cases. Now, I want to be clear that just because you have a family history of dementia doesn't make it automatically familial dementia. That's only a relevant term if it's caused by a mutated gene, okay? In most cases, the reason we see this connection of dementia within families is because they are often exposed to the same environment and pass down the same bad habits, like an unhealthy diet, smoking, a sedentary lifestyle. So when you combine that with potential susceptibility or risk genes, which increase the likelihood of developing dementia, but don't guarantee it, right? That is what is believed to cause dementia to be expressed in some people and not others. So there really is so much power in changing your lifestyle as a way to prevent dementia, okay? So let's briefly talk about genetic testing. So in families where a gene abnormality is known or suspected, or a person develops dementia at a young age, or if someone is worried about their risk of developing a genetic or familial version of dementia, then their primary care physician can refer them to a genetic counseling specialist, hopefully one who specializes in something like neurodegenerative disease, to discuss any concerns and arrange for genetic testing if necessary. Now, I did want to let you guys know that right now there is a company called Probably Genetic. Probably Genetic is a group of geneticists, engineers, and patients, and the primary goal is to make genetic testing more accessible to undiagnosed rare disease patients. And as a part of this initiative, they recently launched a new program funded by the Bluefield Project for Frontotemporal Dementia that offers free genetic testing to eligible participants. So basically, through this program, they're trying to help people with undiagnosed neurological disorders find out if there could be a genetic cause to their symptoms. So, for one, though, you must be in the US, with the exception of New York, for whatever reason that may be. And then, two, you must have symptoms that may be suggestive of frontotemporal dementia. So, the behavior, language, and motor impairments that we often see with FTD, right? And if you aren't familiar, I'm going to go ahead and link the podcast episode that we did on FTD in the podcast notes, okay? So check that out if you want to familiarize yourself with FTD and some of the symptoms, okay? But essentially, you go to their website, which will also be linked in the podcast notes, and you take a quick eligibility quiz. I myself went through the quiz, but of course I didn't submit it. I just wanted to see what the questions were like for myself. And they were all relatively straightforward and can be filled out yourself or on behalf of someone else. Now, I didn't time it, but it didn't take long at all, maybe 5 minutes. Now, once you submit it, it's not one of those quizzes where you find out immediately once you submit if you're eligible, okay? You have to wait about 3 weeks for their team to review your submission and determine your eligibility, which can be easily accessed through their portal. Now, once deemed eligible, the eligible recipient will receive a test kit to their home address. And the great part is that all Probably Genetic needs to do what they do is a saliva sample, so no blood necessary. So yay for that, right? And then as part of the testing process, those who are eligible will have pre and post virtual genetic counseling sessions free of cost as well, which is a nice and important addition. Now, let's say that you aren't eligible for the free genetic testing and counseling sessions. What happens next, right? So essentially, you will go on a wait list and they will re-review each case as more tests become available, and they may even review your submission for other programs that you may be better suited for. So it really is a neat program that Probably Genetic is offering in partnership with Bluefield Project for Frontotemporal Dementia. And again, I'll post the link to the quiz in the podcast notes if you're interested, and you can see if you or your loved one is eligible. And let me just say, this is not something that I'm being paid to say. Probably Genetic is not sponsoring this podcast episode, but it is something that I was informed about, looked into for myself, and thought that it would be good for you guys to be aware of, okay? So that's all I have for you for this episode. Hopefully you found this episode informative and enjoyable. If you did enjoy this podcast episode, please consider leaving us a review to help others find the podcast. If anyone has any questions, comments, or future podcast requests, remember you can send us an email at podcast@whatthedementia.com. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of What the Dementia by Bambu Care. We look forward to catching you on the next episode. Take care, and until next time, stay strong, care on, and remember, you are not alone. Bambu Care is always here.